Hello, everyone. This is Dan Lacari. I'm helping with the project around history of games. And today we're lucky to have Chris Deering, who has been an industry veteran for as long as the games have been around, working for Atari in the 80s and even brought the PlayStation to Europe in the 90s. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Happy to be here. Dan, sorry.
So, well, so what we're going to start with to kick us off, Chris, is because of the where games have come from, video games in particular. Tell us a little bit about the journey and how games have changed since those early days, Atari, to now.
Well, Atari came as a derivative of the original Pong game, which was started with an oscilloscope, and someone had the brilliant idea to maneuver the oscilloscope, and we managed to produce a quasi tennis game, and that started getting people hooked that had previously been sort of more in the pinball fan group, but the idea of game designs really goes back to interactive books. And some of the industry veterans like E. Livingstone in the UK, Steve Jackson, they go back, came from board games and then interactive books. So then I guess in the very earliest days, there was a small memory. The games were sort of arcade, were taken from the coin op, basically Pac-Man and Pong and those kinds of games, and made possible at home by the mass production efficiencies of a standardized design. And for about the price of a VCR, the average home could put under their TV something that gave them a at-home version of an arcade game, no more insert coin. So the earliest games were sort of derived from insert coin mentality in game design. And so that really had an aspect called death penalty and free extra lives. So, what they would, when you got to the point where they knew that you would add another quarter, then they killed you off. And it was sort of a game of cat and mouse between the game designer and the coin operator. And that mentality carried over into games for a while. Most games were arcade style. But alongside this was the computer, and finally the personal computer, which made accessibility to home computing affordable. And the earliest games in that space were text-based adventure games, Zork, and games like that. They subsequently were called mud rooms, and that gave rise to the role-playing model. There's a door on your right, you hear a sound of a barking dog. There's a door on your right, on your left, there's light shining through the crevices. Which one do you want? And then depending on what you wanted, the branch continued. So it was just like the branch of a interactive book. As the chipsets became more powerful and could deliver more realistic experiences on screen, it was still way before anything but sort of synthesized sound, blips and bleeps. You could start to simulate things like, pole position, the very first driving game, which ultimately became Formula One and then GT. So driving games came into the scene, and types of shooters, not just Space Invaders, but more like Lara Croft type games where you're encountering things and killing enemies, getting in your way. But on a parallel course, there was quite a new phase of the industry called educational games. And I was with a company that had a very big share of that subset, and the game hit parade charts were all covered in Billboard magazine. And Billboard magazine had a section for games, and they even had a section for educational games. A Spinnaker that I worked for had 8 out of the top 10 educational games. And they were designed to be played on console, but also on Apple II, and then a little bit later, even the first IBM PC, the 16-bit IBM PC. And those games were cunningly sold to parents. Uh, there were suites of games. You know, Spinnaker must have made have had 25 games, and about 8 years later, along came Jumpstart, and these games, only 2 or 3 of them were able to engage the kids and teach them numbers and letters. You know, Sesame Street style educational process. And the ones that were Snooper Troops and Kinder Comp were very popular, and the others just sort of lined the bookshelves of the parents, each trying to impress other parents about whether they had the entire, you know, suite of Spinnaker games like they had the entire suite of Encyclopedia Britannica. So you had educational games coming along, and then as the power and the sound and everything became more realistic, you started having more team play, football games, and various other sports, and ultimately, um, sort of third-person adventure games like Lara Croft, you know, was one of the first ones that came as an iconic game for PlayStation 1. PlayStation 1 changed the paradigm considerably from its predecessors, although there had been disc-based games, and there had been games that had real sound versus simulated synthesizer sound. But PlayStation was the first one that got a mass distribution and affordability in the family rather than a few special hobbyists like the Amiga and that kind of thing. So PlayStation sort of debuted, introduced CD sound to the games, which made a whole lot better atmosphere. It had much better graphics and speed and number of pixels and physics and things that would make a lot of difference in the game design. And throughout these years, you know, people, the evangelistic nature, I mean, there were no social networks, but word of mouth and general, you know, fad factors came into play, and the number of homes, the percentage of homes with game machines went up to 5 and then 10 and then 15%. And once anything gets into 15% of homes, it happens in very rapid fashion that it gets to 50% of homes. That was true of VCRs, personal computers, and probably color TVs, if you go back. So the tipping point came probably the late 90s, and then early in the 2000s when the PlayStation 2, which was a real upgrade. And since PlayStation 2, you've had very good frame rates, very good color and resolution, very good physics, and ultimately, and I think Xbox, well, let's say Sega was the first with DreamWorks, but ultimately Xbox pioneered the online aspect of consoles. Before that, there were the MMOGs like EverQuest on PC, but you know, to be fair to Microsoft, they kind of pioneered the subscription model, being always connected, and that started a new phase, which enabled games to actually be released with more risk, knowing that because the machine was on the internet, they could patch and fix bugs. So games that had previously been referred to by beta releases, you know, where gold discs were sent out to reviewers, and then the QA departments of the games companies, hundreds of people playing in the middle of the night, trying to crash the cars and create bugs and you know, look for bugs, because they were terrified that if they put out that disc into 25,000 stores and there was a bug on it, they'd have to call them all back, make new ones, get them all back. It was a nightmare you just didn't want to face. Once it became possible to patch games, and it started really with the Steam type of games, where PC games were started much earlier because they were online. And the whole phenomenon of Steam was really a company that delivered patches for Microsoft. And they came to realize that, what the heck, since we're delivering the download, delivering the patches, why don't we just become a distribution, you know, electronic distribution store? And they still have the majority of the market. It's a monopoly almost, which started as a patching service. So that kind of evolution meant that games could be launched a little bit short of official launch, or let's say with the knowledge that they would be polished, they would be fine-tuned, the gloss coat would be put on after they got some feedback. Not only would they fix some bugs, but they would polish and tweak so that, within 3 or 4 months of the launch of a product or a sequel, the game would be optimized. So that introduced great efficiencies and saved a lot of wasted money and inventory and discs being shipped and thrown away and reshipped. And so the efficiency has improved a lot of industries, and it certainly has improved the gaming industry. But that's kind of an infrastructural slice of what was going on at the time.
Oh, that is brilliant, Chris. That's really good.
Cost of a game, the first PlayStation games were, if you spend more than $250,000, that was expensive. Now that's what these people spend to do a mobile phone game, and there's 500 mobile phone games a day launched. And in the old days of PlayStation 1, it was 500 games a year launched. So, the efficiency, the ubiquity of internet speeds and all of that has made it far more possible to use a music industry, comparison, parallel. You can go on TikTok now and release 1 minute of a song you just wrote and play and dance at the same time. You haven't had to talk to a lawyer. You haven't had to talk to a distributor. You haven't had to talk to a developer. You could probably even niche some of the sound. And it just made independent, indie creative far more accessible, and things break through, Not so long ago, probably I met with the Edinburgh Interactive Festival in the early 2000s. And I don't remember his name, but we had a fellow who wrote a game called Doodle Jump at his kitchen table in Brooklyn, New York, a Russian guy. And within 2 or 3 months, selling them at 79 cents each or $1, he was worth $4 million. One person sitting at his kitchen table. It was a great game. And it was, I think eventually it went on mobile phones, but the facility for creativity to be encouraged, rewarded, ubiquitized has all been fantastic. The counterbalance of that, or the flip side of that, is we are deluged, and no matter how many things are launched, there's only one number one. And number one now is, gargantuan in terms of audience and money made, no matter what it costs, even if it costs very little. And all the other literally thousands of initiatives, if it's a TikTok or a YouTube launch or something on a mobile phone like Doodle Jump, okay, somebody spends some time at their kitchen table and it either makes it or it doesn't. But now the same thing of that kitchen table scenario would be people spending $250,000 and a team of 5 to 10 people, and thousands of these efforts coming out, all those requiring money to be raised, subsidy from government, Kickstarter projects, loans from Silicon Valley Bank with a string attached if they ever went public, all kinds of conditions, but most of it going nowhere. And for us at the receiving end, we have to use our ingenuity through social media, likes and dislikes, sites which review things, or now YouTube influencers like PewDiePie, who become stars in their own right as curation experts, just to avoid loss of time. Because in the new world of everything instant access, from home delivered pizza to the price of your stock, the new gold, some people say it's digital gold is Bitcoin or the blockchain, but I would say the new goal is basically healthy time. It's the only non-replaceable thing we all have. And there's nothing worse than wasting 4 hours plowing through the trial of 15 forgettable games because something sparkled at you on a Facebook page or a tweet, and you waste your time. So, curation has become curation and influencing has become as important in the new games industry as national TV and signboards on the UEFA Champions League was in the mid time, or in the early days, I don't know, direct mail, or I guess it was maybe radio. But curation of the massive amount of stuff coming out uh, is part of the value to the end user in that it helps them avoid wasting gold. And gold is healthy time, even in
Well, Chris,
entertainment. Yeah.
that's a really insightful description of the way things have gone, and I think it reminds me back to over 10 years ago when you were still the chairman of Codemasters and you were meeting with some of the other industry leaders here in the West Midlands to talk about what games could provide as an industry.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the faces that were made when you were showing the growth, and not just how well it was doing now, but what the projected growth was going to be. And this was at the very first big mobile a boom in terms of games. And so I think it's funny because you look at those projections now and they were way underestimated, but even at that time they seemed unbelievable that you were going to be tens of billions, and now it's hundreds of billions in terms of what's
really,
come up.
It still boggles my mind. I think some of it is in the classification. Game isn't the perfect word, but it would say interactive experience with an entertainment factor, because sometimes surfing the internet can be an entertaining thing to do, or you going on Google Earth. So Google Earth is not a game, but it could be considered competing for that gold. And when we were doing, I can't remember the chart track, I think it was the UK. Anyway, there were a number of different Nielsen type rating services for games. Some were measuring withdrawal from warehouses of retailers, Blockbuster or Target or W.H. Smith. I remember Ghostbusters game. But my God, I lost my train of thought.
That's all right.
What was
To be
I
honest,
just? I was just onto something, and what was I saying?
I think it was about time in terms of how valuable the people. The gold is their time.
Yeah. So defining the market side. Okay, so at the time when the charts were being read, they were the actual number one game, because the charts all were related to money spent or things through stores, right? The number one game from a time standpoint was not considered part of the industry, but it was 10 times more played than anything else in the whole industry. And of all things, it was played by women over 40. So the number of play hours for women over 40 playing solitaire on the desktop was more than all the hours spent by all the kids, nerds and otherwise, on all the football games and FIFA and Formula One, etc. So the definition of the market has changed. Google Earth is not considered part of the market, but free-to-play solitaire is part of the market, because there's a chance for an aftermarket to buy fancy colored cards or whatever. And when the comparison of the games industry versus the other industries, when I was at Atari, we were happy to say that the games industry was bigger than the movie business or the music business. In fact, it was bigger than both of those two combined. In the next mid-generation, the 90s and early 2000s, the worldwide music business was about 20 million. And the game business in total was about 60 million. So it was still billion, sorry. And the movie industry was about 15 billion. So we were still bigger than the movies and music combined. But then, since that time, the games industry, when you start adding things like Twitch, where people playing games as a spectator sport and people having actually competitions in stadia as well as online with an audience come into and start furthering the awareness of things, plus Twitter, Facebook, and all other forms of social media, you had an industry which went from 60 billion to 120 billion almost overnight, and now getting close to 200 billion. And it's still much more than the music industry, who's maybe gone back up to 30 billion, and the movie business, which after COVID will maybe get back up to 20 billion. And even with Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, there is nothing that compares with interactive computer assisted entertainment. And the number of entries and the curation factor are all now ever present. Fixing broken stuff is immediate. And we're now just beginning to think about, instead of the phone being your computer and your communications device and something you check who's knocking on your door, even if you're halfway around the world, or who is trying to steal your car. So the phone is a ubiquitous brain cell, brainstem, and the next wave, I think, is going to be your sunglasses. And I know you have. You're a big Bose.
That's a perfect point there to ask my last question, because I wanted to wrap it up exactly on where we're going in the games experience, because I know you and I get a chance every once in a while to play a little golf virtually, because we haven't been able to see each other. So the fact that you can now take that immersive experience and do it from anywhere and socialize and have that multiplayer and immersive experience, that in addition to glasses like these where you can talk to them and you'll be able to have a layer of information and content overlaid, do you believe that people will move away from the screens? Do you think that there's only growth in this, or do you think there's going to be some losers, or some technology that will become obsolete, like a laptop or a PC game, for instance?
Well, I mean, there was a time when the consoles depended on the TV for the screen. There was a side development of Game Boy, in Germany, where it was considered very naff to have a game machine under the TV. That was something from the arcades done by the train station, where all the nefarious characters hung. So the Game Boy was very big in places like South Korea and Germany, which were fanatic about children's education and not being distracted. But the phone as your brainstem, it took people away from the living room TV, and now they just do big games and watch sports. But they're basically playing on the tube and on the train and on the plane, and they're doing Google Earth on the plane, and they're doing their emails on the plane. But it's the brainstem, and the brainstem will move to, I think, and not completely, but to voice recognition. I've always felt that, and I think there are some now, radio mysteries or radio puzzles. I call them Alexa games. I think there are some now, but the way they say, I think the ads for radio advertising say you can close your eyes, but you can't close your ears. So you can do a lot of different things when you're listening to radio. When you're watching a game on the screen, you're pretty riveted. And okay, you can move the screen with you when you get on the bus. And you can even go into an immersive world by putting on something that sort of takes your total eye attention. So I think the virtual reality will start bringing aspects of esports to two competitors, and you can play tennis, not just like Pong, but really on a court, with VR with somebody in Hong Kong, and get a quite good experience. And that's one phase of the new era. And then you'll take that head, I call fishbowl on head. You take the totally immersive headset from VR and move it over into something where you can be actually walking down the street, playing a game or getting information or finding out the price of stocks or, listening to a audio book and all of the above and still know that you're stepping out in front of a taxi, and still have a real world perspective and multitask your brain. So that, who knows what that will result in terms of proliferation or curation or recommendation engines, but we'll all get used to it. I mean, kids today, my grandson is 4 years old. He can play games on his Kindle that I couldn't play, wouldn't have played till I was 25. And for them, it was always there. Like when we grew up, the phone was there and the car was there. We didn't really think about it. Oh, yeah, we're going in the car, we're going somewhere. The phone rang, we're going to talk to somebody. And there's the game screen. There's the mobile phone. There's the network. There's the social media. So the kids born today will consider all of this as regular as, plumbing and electricity and the lights. And what we'll then do is challenge their own way to create, taking advantage of those things as second nature. And there'll be another whole wave of creativity. It can't all be, kumbaya with 100 people. That's just, people don't have that much time. But when your audience can be worldwide 24/7, you get up at 3 in the morning and find something you could play with someone that you know or don't know. And all of the barriers of time and space and weather and, difficulty are all being broken down. So there's the notion of computer-assisted entertainment combined with linear entertainment or linear education or all of the above will continue. And we're too myopic based on what we consider as our frame of reference to be able to generate what will really be the change. The new iconic change will probably be written by a 10-year-old,
Well,
and that's okay,
yes,
So
no,
anyway,
and I tell you, Chris, that is absolutely the kind of inspiration that I think this project's all about and telling how things are going. So I'm going to wrap it up there just to say thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing about and seeing your prognosis and the prophecies that you've talked about come true. So
I'll come
thanks again
back
for
in
your
a
time.
couple of years and I will probably prove myself completely wrong.
I doubt it,
Okay.
Chris. You've been pretty good so far on those predictions. So I appreciate your time.